I never thought my life could fall apart in just 30 seconds. But there I was, standing in my own living room at my husband's birthday party, watching my mother-in-law destroy everything with a smile on her face. "Mr. Whitmore, I'd like you to meet my daughter-in-law, Natalie," Patricia said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "She's currently an unemployed loser and a failed wife who can't even keep a simple job." The words hit me like a slap across the face. The entire room went silent. I could feel every pair of eyes turning toward us, watching this train wreck unfold. My cheeks burned with embarrassment as I stood there, frozen, unable to speak or move. Mr. Whitmore was Patricia's boss, the CEO of the consulting firm where she worked as a senior manager. He was tall, well-dressed, and had kind eyes that now looked shocked at what he'd just heard. I wanted to disappear into the floor, to run away and never come back. But then, something unexpected happened. Mr. Whitmore looked at Patricia with the coldest expression I'd ever seen on anyone's face. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but deadly serious. "Patricia," he said slowly, "you're fired." The room exploded into chaos. Patricia's face went white as a sheet. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. The other guests started whispering frantically to each other, their voices creating a buzz of confusion and shock. What?" Patricia finally managed to stammer. "Mr. Whitmore, surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly what I said," he replied, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Clear out your office on Monday. Security will escort you out." I couldn't believe what was happening. Just moments before, I had been the target of the most humiliating moment of my life. Now somehow the tables had completely turned. Patricia, who had been so confident and cruel just seconds ago, looked like she was about to faint. Kevin, my husband, rushed over from across the room where he'd been talking to his college friends. His face was red with anger, but I could see he was confused about what had just happened. "Mom, what did you just say?" he demanded, looking between Patricia and me. "Did you really just call Natalie those horrible things?" Patricia tried to recover, forcing a shaky laugh. "Oh, Kevin, darling, it was just a little joke. Mr. Whitmore knows I was only teasing. Don't you, sir?" But Mr. Whitmore wasn't having any of it. He shook his head firmly. "There was nothing funny about what you just said, Patricia. That was cruel, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable." The other party guests were starting to gather their things, clearly uncomfortable with the drama unfolding before them. Some of Patricia's co-workers looked embarrassed to be associated with her. Others just stared in shock at seeing their colleague get fired at a birthday party. I finally found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Thank you," I said to Mr. Whitmore. "You didn't have to do that." He turned to me with a gentle smile that was completely different from the stern look he'd given Patricia. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not in their own home." Patricia was now frantically trying to salvage the situation. "Mr. Whitmore, please, let's discuss this privately. I've worked for your company for 8 years. Surely we can work this out. I was having a bad day and The decision is final," he interrupted. "Someone who would humiliate a family member in public is not someone I want representing my company." As Mr. Whitmore walked away to get his coat, Patricia turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked truly defeated. But I could see that she blamed me for everything that had just happened. The party was clearly over. Guests were leaving quickly, offering awkward goodbyes and avoiding eye contact. Kevin stood between his mother and me, looking torn and confused. But as I watched Patricia's world crumble around her, I couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. 3 months earlier, my world had started falling apart on a Tuesday morning. I remember it perfectly because I was wearing my lucky blue dress, the one I'd worn to every important meeting for the past 2 years. Ironic, considering it didn't bring me any luck that day. "Natalie, could you come to my office, please?" My manager's voice was different that morning. Softer, more careful. That's when I knew something was wrong. The walk down the hallway felt like it lasted forever. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. When I sat down across from him, he couldn't even look me in the eyes. "I'm really sorry, Natalie," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "The company is restructuring. We're letting go of 30% of the marketing department." Just like that, 5 years of hard work disappeared. 5 years of late nights, successful campaigns, and building relationships with clients, gone. The worst part wasn't losing my job. The worst part was going home and telling Kevin. He held me while I cried that night, promising everything would be okay. "We'll figure this out together," he whispered into my hair. "You're talented, Nat. Someone else will see that." But someone else had very different ideas about my situation. Patricia showed up at our apartment the next evening with a casserole and a fake smile. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, setting the dish on our counter like she owned the place. "Kevin told me about your little setback." Little setback. That's what she called losing my career. "It's temporary, Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm already updating my resume and reaching out to contacts." She made a clicking sound with her tongue, the same sound she made when she disapproved of something. "Well, dear, the job market is very competitive these days, especially for people in their late 20s without advanced degrees." Kevin walked into the kitchen just as she said it. "Mom, Natalie has a bachelor's degree and 5 years of experience. She'll find something." "Of course she will, sweetheart," Patricia said, patting his arm. "I'm just saying it might take a while. Maybe this is a sign that she should focus on being a better wife instead of chasing after career dreams." The comment stung, but I bit my tongue. Kevin frowned at his mother, but he didn't say anything strong enough to shut her down. That became the pattern over the next few weeks. Every time Patricia visited, she had a new way to remind me of my unemployment. "Still no luck with the job hunt?" she'd ask with fake concern. "Maybe you should lower your expectations. Not everyone can have a successful career like mine." She'd bring up other women she knew, wives of Kevin's friends who had real jobs or who were contributing to their households. She never said it directly, but the message was clear. I was a burden. The worst part was watching Kevin struggle to defend me. He'd try, but Patricia had this way of making her insults sound like helpful advice. When he'd call her out, she'd act hurt and confused. "I'm just trying to help, Kevin," she'd say with tears in her eyes. "I want what's best for both of you." As weeks turned into months, I started believing her. Maybe I was a failure. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe Kevin deserved better than a wife who couldn't even keep a job. The breaking point came when Patricia suggested we cancel Kevin's birthday party. "It seems inappropriate to celebrate when the family is going through such financial stress," she said during one of her surprise visits. "Besides, Natalie probably can't afford to host properly right now." That's when Kevin finally showed some backbone. "We're having the party, Mom. Natalie's been planning it for weeks." "Well, if you insist," Patricia said with a sigh. "But let me help. I'll invite some of my colleagues from work. It would be good for Natalie to meet successful people. Maybe someone will take pity on her and offer her something." I should have said no. I should have told her we didn't need her help or her pity. But I was so worn down, so tired of fighting, that I just nodded. "That's very kind of you, Patricia," I said quietly. She smiled then, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. "Wonderful," she said. "I'll make sure to introduce you to everyone properly. After all, first impressions are so important in business." Looking back now, I realized that was the moment she decided to destroy me. She'd spent 3 months breaking down my confidence, making me feel worthless and small. The party would be her grand finale. The perfect opportunity to humiliate me in front of people who mattered in her professional world. I just didn't see it coming. The morning of Kevin's birthday party, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that felt like it was made of concrete. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night, worrying about everything that could go wrong. Kevin was already in the shower, humming some song he'd heard on the radio, completely unaware of the anxiety eating me alive. I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to wear. Everything looked wrong. Too casual, too formal, too bright, too dull. Finally, I settled on a simple black dress that Kevin had always said looked nice on me. At least if I was going to embarrass myself, I'd look decent doing it. Patricia arrived at noon, 3 hours before the party was supposed to start. She knocked once and then used her spare key to let herself in, calling out, "Hello, darlings," like she owned the place. "You're early," I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "I thought you might need help," she replied, looking around our living room with that critical expression she always wore. "Good thing I came. This setup won't work at all." Before I could protest, she was already moving our furniture around. The coffee table went to a different corner. The couch got pushed back against the wall. She rearranged the flowers I'd spent an hour arranging that morning, clicking her tongue disapprovingly. "Patricia, everything was fine the way it was," I said, watching her undo all my work. "Oh, sweetie, you tried your best," she said without looking at me. "But when you're entertaining professional people, presentation matters. You'll understand someday when you have a real career again." Kevin came downstairs, freshly showered and wearing the new shirt I'd bought him for his birthday. "Hey, Mom, you're here early." "Just helping Natalie get ready," Patricia said, giving him a kiss on the cheek. "She's been working so hard on this party. It's sweet how she's trying to contribute, even without a job." There it was again, that little dig wrapped up in fake praise. Kevin frowned slightly but didn't say anything. He never did. For the next 2 hours, Patricia took over everything. She criticized the music I'd chosen, saying it was too young for her colleagues. She moved the food around on the platters, claiming my arrangement looked amateur. She even suggested I change my dress. "Black is so depressing, dear," she said, eyeing me up and down. "Don't you have something more cheerful? You want to make a good impression on my boss." "I like this dress," I said firmly. It was one of the few times I stood up to her that day. She shrugged. "Suit yourself, though I do think first impressions matter so much in business. Mr. Whitmore is very particular about the people he associates with." The way she said it made my skin crawl, like she was planning something, like this whole thing was some kind of test I was destined to fail. As the afternoon wore on, Patricia kept making little comments about the party, about me, about how important her work friends were. She told me 3 times how successful Mr. Whitmore was, how he'd built his company from nothing, how he only respected people who pulled their own weight. "He's very traditional," she said, while adjusting the napkins for the 4th time. "He believes wives should support their husbands, not be a burden on them." Each comment felt like a tiny needle prick. By the time guests were supposed to arrive, I felt like I'd been stabbed 100 times. Kevin found me in the kitchen, gripping the counter and trying to calm my nerves. "You okay?" he asked, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Just nervous," I admitted. "Your mom's friends are all so successful, and I'm just—" "You're amazing," he said, turning me around to face him. "Don't let her get in your head, Nat. You're smart, talented, and anyone would be lucky to know you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as the doorbell rang and the first guests arrived, all I could think about was Patricia's smile when she talked about introducing me to her boss. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to enjoy watching me fall. I just didn't know how far she planned to push me. The first guests to arrive were Kevin's college friends, Tom and his wife Jennifer, along with Mike and his girlfriend Ashley. They were easy to talk to, people I'd known for years who made me feel comfortable and normal. For a brief moment, I thought maybe the evening wouldn't be so bad after all. Then Patricia's colleagues started showing up. They came in expensive cars and designer clothes, carrying bottles of wine that probably cost more than my grocery budget for a week. Patricia immediately swooped in to greet them, her voice becoming higher and more animated than usual. "Welcome! Welcome!" she gushed, taking their coats and introducing them to Kevin. "This is my son, the birthday boy. He's an accountant at Morrison Associates." I noticed how she emphasized Kevin's job title, making sure everyone knew he was successful and employed. When she introduced me, it was always just, "This is Natalie, Kevin's wife," with no mention of what I did or who I was beyond that label. Mrs. Henderson from Patricia's department arrived with her husband, a doctor. Patricia made sure to mention his profession 3 times in the first 5 minutes. Dr. Henderson was just telling me about his new practice, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. It's so wonderful when couples can both contribute professionally to their household. The comment was clearly directed at me, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Jennifer, Kevin's friend's wife, gave me a sympathetic look and tried to change the subject by asking about the appetizers I'd made. These are delicious, Natalie, she said. Did you make them yourself? She has plenty of time for cooking these days, Patricia interjected with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. It's nice when wives can focus on domestic duties. The conversation continued like this for the next hour. Every time someone complimented something I'd done for the party, Patricia found a way to remind everyone that I had all the time in the world since I wasn't working. When Kevin's friends talked about their jobs, she'd make pointed comments about how important it was for both partners to be productive members of society. I tried to escape to the kitchen several times, but Patricia always found reasons to call me back into the living room. Natalie, come tell Mrs. Chen about that cooking class you took, she'd say, making it sound like I was just playing around instead of trying to build new skills. The worst moment came when Ashley, Mike's girlfriend, mentioned that she was between jobs after finishing graduate school. Oh, how exciting, Patricia said with genuine enthusiasm. What field are you looking in? Marketing and communications, Ashley replied. I just finished my master's degree, so I'm hoping to find something in brand management. Patricia's eyes lit up. How wonderful! A master's degree, that's so impressive. Natalie used to work in marketing too, didn't you, dear? All eyes turned to me. I felt like a deer caught in headlights. Yes, I worked for Brennan Communications for 5 years. Until she got laid off? Patricia added quickly, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. It's such a competitive field, especially for people without advanced degrees. Ashley looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing the tension. I'm sure you'll find something soon, she said kindly. Oh, I hope so, Patricia sighed dramatically. It's been 3 months now. We're all just hoping she finds something suitable, even if it's not quite at the level she's used to. Kevin was across the room talking to Tom about sports, completely oblivious to what his mother was doing to me. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone exactly what Patricia was really like, but I couldn't. These were her colleagues, her professional network. Making a scene would only prove her point about me being unstable or difficult. As the evening progressed, Patricia's comments became bolder. She started telling stories about young wives today who expected everything to be handed to them. She talked about the importance of realistic expectations and how some people needed to accept their limitations. Each comment felt like a public slap. The other guests were starting to look uncomfortable, but no one said anything. They just exchanged glances and changed the subject when they could. Then, at exactly 8:30, the doorbell rang one final time. Patricia's entire demeanor changed instantly. Her back straightened, her smile became genuine for the first time all evening, and she practically ran to the door. That must be Mr. Whitmore, she announced to the room, smoothing down her hair. Everyone, I'd like you to meet my boss. He's the CEO of our company. My stomach dropped to my feet. This was it. This was the moment Patricia had been building up to all evening. All those little comments, all that undermining, it had all been leading to this. As she opened the door and greeted her boss with an overly bright smile, I saw the predatory look in her eyes. She had been setting me up all night, making sure everyone knew exactly how much of a failure I was. Now she was ready to deliver the final blow. Mr. Whitmore stepped into our living room like he owned every space he entered. He was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of confident presence that made everyone else seem smaller. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and carried himself with the ease of someone who was used to being the most important person in any room. Alexander! Patricia practically sang his name, taking his coat with the enthusiasm of a schoolgirl meeting her favorite celebrity. I'm so glad you could make it. Kevin will be thrilled that you're here. Happy to celebrate with the family, Mr. Whitmore said politely, his voice warm but professional. Thank you for inviting me, Patricia. I watched from across the room as Patricia immediately began introducing him to her colleagues. She was in her element now, basking in the reflected glory of having her boss at her son's party. The other guests seemed impressed, and I could see Patricia growing more confident with each introduction. Kevin came over to greet Mr. Whitmore, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for coming, sir. It means a lot that you'd take time out of your evening." "Your mother speaks about you often," Mr. Whitmore replied with a genuine smile. "She's very proud of your success at Morrison Associates." I stayed in the background, hoping to avoid the inevitable introduction for as long as possible. But Patricia's eyes found mine across the room, and I saw that predatory gleam again. She was ready for her grand finale. "Mr. Whitmore," she called out, her voice cutting through the conversations around us. "There's someone very special I'd like you to meet." The room seemed to quiet down as she approached me, her boss following behind her. I felt like I was watching my own execution in slow motion. Every step she took toward me felt like a countdown to disaster. "This is such a treat," Patricia continued, her voice getting louder and more theatrical. "I've been wanting to introduce you two all evening." She reached me and placed her hand on my arm with fake affection. Her grip was tight enough to leave marks, and I could feel her excitement radiating through her fingers. This was the moment she'd been planning for months. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice now loud enough for everyone in the room to hear clearly, "I'd like you to meet my daughter-in-law, Natalie." I opened my mouth to say hello, to try to make a normal introduction, but Patricia wasn't finished. She paused for just a moment, letting the anticipation build, and then delivered her killing blow. "She's currently an unemployed loser and a failed wife who can't even keep a simple job." The words hit the room like a physical force. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Someone's wine glass clinked against a table as they set it down too hard. I heard Jennifer gasp from somewhere behind me. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The humiliation was so intense it was almost physical pain. My face burned with embarrassment, and I could feel tears threatening to spill over. This was worse than losing my job. This was worse than anything Patricia had ever done to me before. But then I looked at Mr. Whitmore's face, and something unexpected happened. Instead of the polite smile or uncomfortable laugh I expected, his expression turned to stone. His jaw tightened, and his eyes went cold in a way that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. He looked at Patricia like she was something disgusting he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "Patricia," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent room. "You're fired." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Patricia's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then pure terror. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. "What?" she finally managed to stammer, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Whitmore, surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly what I said," he replied, his voice cutting through her protests like a knife. "Clear out your office on Monday. Security will escort you out." The room erupted into chaos. Guests started whispering frantically to each other. Patricia's colleagues looked mortified, clearly embarrassed to be associated with her. Kevin came rushing over from across the room, his face red with anger and confusion. Patricia tried to recover, forcing a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Oh, Kevin, darling, it was just a little joke. Mr. Whitmore knows I was only teasing. Don't you, sir?" But Mr. Whitmore wasn't having any of it. He shook his head firmly, his expression never softening. "There was nothing funny about what you just said, Patricia. That was cruel, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable." In that moment, watching Patricia's world crumble around her, I realized that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. The silence that followed Mr. Whitmore's declaration was deafening. Patricia stood frozen, her face cycling through shades of white and red like a broken traffic light. The confident woman who had been orchestrating my humiliation just moments before now looked like she might collapse. "Mr. Whitmore, please," Patricia's voice cracked as she reached toward him with shaking hands. "I've worked for your company for 8 years. Surely we can discuss this privately. I was having a difficult evening and "The decision is final," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Someone who would humiliate a family member in public is not someone I want representing my company." Kevin stepped between his mother and Mr. Whitmore, his face flushed with anger I'd never seen before. "Mom, what is wrong with you?" His voice was loud enough that everyone could hear. "How could you say something so horrible about Natalie?" "Kevin, sweetheart, you don't understand," Patricia pleaded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I was just trying to help. Sometimes people need to hear the truth to motivate them." "Help?" Kevin's voice rose even higher. "You called my wife a loser and a failure in front of a room full of people? How is that helping anyone?" The other guests were clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before them. Patricia's colleagues from work looked mortified, whispering among themselves and avoiding eye contact with anyone. Mrs. Henderson grabbed her husband's arm and started moving toward the door. "We should probably go," she said quietly to Patricia, but loud enough for others to hear. "This seems like a family matter." One by one, Patricia's work friends began making their excuses and heading for the door. They offered quick, awkward goodbyes to Kevin and me, but completely ignored Patricia. I could see the panic in her eyes as she watched her professional network abandon her. "Wait, please don't leave," Patricia called out desperately. "This is all just a misunderstanding. Mr. Whitmore, tell them this isn't what it seems." But Mr. Whitmore was putting on his coat, preparing to leave as well. He turned to me with a gentle expression that was completely different from the stern look he'd given Patricia. "I apologize that you had to experience that," he said quietly. "No one should be treated with such disrespect, especially in their own home." "Thank you," I managed to whisper, still in shock from everything that had happened. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied firmly. "I've built my company on values of respect and integrity. Patricia's behavior tonight showed me that she doesn't share those values." Patricia made one last desperate attempt to save her career. "Mr. Whitmore, I'll do anything to make this right. I'll apologize publicly. I'll take sensitivity training. Patricia," he said, turning to face her one final time. "In my 30 years of business, I've learned that how someone treats their family when they think no one important is watching tells you everything you need to know about their character." He paused at the door and looked back at me. "Mrs. Brooks, I hope you find an employer who recognizes your worth. Based on how gracefully you've handled yourself tonight, I'm certain you will." After Mr. Whitmore left, the remaining guests quickly followed. Kevin's friends offered supportive hugs and promised to call soon, clearly wanting to escape the awkwardness. Within 15 minutes, our living room was empty except for Kevin, Patricia, and me. Patricia slumped into our couch, her head in her hands. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked truly defeated. But when she looked up at me, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Pure hatred. "This is all your fault," she hissed, her voice venomous. "If you weren't such a pathetic failure, none of this would have happened. You've ruined everything." "That's enough!" Kevin exploded, his voice echoing through the room. "You did this to yourself, Mom. Natalie didn't make you say those horrible things. You chose to be cruel, and now you're facing the consequences." Patricia stared at her son like she didn't recognize him. For 8 years of marriage, Kevin had always tried to keep the peace between us, but something had finally snapped inside him. The woman who had tried to destroy me had finally pushed too far. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office on the 15th floor of Whitmore Associates, looking out at the city skyline and still hardly believing how much my life had changed. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over my desk where I was reviewing marketing proposals for 3 major clients. The job offer had come 2 weeks after Kevin's birthday party. Mr. Whitmore had called personally, explaining that his company needed a marketing director and asking if I'd be interested in interviewing. I almost hung up, thinking it was some kind of cruel joke, but his voice was sincere and professional. "I meant what I said that night," he told me during our first meeting. "The way you handled yourself under such difficult circumstances showed me exactly the kind of character I want in my company." The interview process was thorough but fair. I had to prove my skills and experience just like any other candidate, but Mr. Whitmore made sure I got a real chance to show what I could do. When they offered me the position with a salary 20% higher than my old job, I cried in the parking lot for 10 minutes before calling Kevin. Patricia's life had taken a very different turn. After losing her job, she'd struggled to find new employment. Word had spread quickly through the professional community about what had happened at the party. In a city where business relationships mattered, being fired for publicly humiliating family members was not the kind of reputation that opened doors. She'd been forced to sell her expensive condo and move into a small apartment across town. Her savings dwindled quickly without her substantial salary, and the lifestyle she'd been so proud of disappeared almost overnight. Kevin had tried to help her financially at first, but Patricia's attitude made it impossible. She refused to take responsibility for what had happened, continuing to blame me for ruining her life. Every conversation ended in arguments, with Patricia demanding that Kevin choose between his mother and his wife. "She's poison, Kevin," I'd told him after one particularly awful phone call where Patricia had screamed at me for stealing her son. "I won't ask you to cut her off completely, but I can't have her in our lives if she's going to keep treating us this way." Kevin had struggled with the decision for weeks. Patricia was his mother, and despite everything, he loved her. But he'd finally seen her true nature that night at the party, and he couldn't unsee it. "I'm done enabling her," he'd said one evening, holding my hand as we sat on our couch. "She needs to learn that actions have consequences. Maybe losing everything will finally teach her some humility." The change in our marriage had been remarkable. Without Patricia's constant interference and criticism, Kevin and I had grown closer than ever. He'd started standing up for me in ways he never had before, and I'd regained the confidence that months of unemployment and Patricia's abuse had stolen from me. We'd even started talking about having children, something we'd put off because I couldn't bear the thought of Patricia being a grandmother to my kids while treating me like garbage. The most surprising development came 3 months after I started my new job. Patricia had swallowed her pride enough to call Kevin and ask if we could meet for coffee. She looked older, tired, and humbled in a way I'd never seen before. "I owe you an apology," she'd said quietly, staring into her coffee cup instead of meeting my eyes. "What I said that night was unforgivable. I was jealous of how much Kevin loved you, and I took out my own insecurities on you in the cruelest way possible." It wasn't a perfect apology. She still made excuses about being stressed and worried about Kevin's future, but it was more accountability than I'd ever expected from her. "I don't expect forgiveness," she'd continued, "but I hope someday we might be able to have a civil relationship. I miss my son." I'd looked at this broken woman across from me and felt something I never thought I'd feel for Patricia: pity. Her need to control and belittle others had cost her everything that mattered. "We can try," I'd said carefully, "but things will be different now. I won't tolerate disrespect, and Kevin won't either." She'd nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand." Now, sitting in my successful career that had grown from the ashes of that horrible night, I realized that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can become the catalyst for the best changes. Patricia's cruelty had backfired spectacularly, leading me to a better job, a stronger marriage, and finally earning the respect I'd always deserved. As I picked up my phone to call Kevin and tell him about the promotion I'd just received, I smiled. Sometimes justice doesn't just come from unexpected places. Sometimes it comes with interest.